The morning began like any other at the towering headquarters of one of the city's most prestigious companies. Glass walls reflected the rising sun, employees hurried across the marble lobby with steaming cups of coffee, and security guards nodded mechanically as they checked passes at the entrance. It was a place of power and ambition, where everyone tried to look sharper, walk faster, and speak louder, as if the louder their footsteps echoed, the more important they were. But into this polished world stepped a woman who seemed out of place. Her back was slightly bent from age, her pace measured, and in her hands she carried a scuffed blue bucket and a pair of yellow cleaning gloves. She wore a plain dress under a faded coat, her hair tied back in a loose bun. To the busy workers bustling past her, she was nothing more than the new cleaner. Nobody asked her name. Nobody offered a smile. To them she was invisible. Her name, though none of them knew it, was Claudia. To the employees she was a stranger with no significance. But in truth, Claudia was the mother of the very man who owned the building, Thomas, the CEO who now ran the empire she had once sacrificed so much to help build. She hadn't come in disguise to play games or to trick anyone for amusement. She had come with a purpose. Claudia had grown uneasy over the years, sensing a change in the culture of her son's company. She had heard whispers, stories of arrogance, of young managers treating subordinates with cruelty, of an environment where success was measured by pride instead of principle. And she wanted to see it for herself. So she had insisted on this little experiment. With her son's reluctant agreement, she entered the building not as the CEO's mother, but as a humble cleaner. The moment she crossed the lobby, she could already feel the weight of eyes upon her. She walked slowly, the pain in her knees reminding her of the years she had carried both burden and dignity with equal strength. Her gaze, however, remained sharp, taking in every detail. She noticed how the receptionist barely lifted her head when Claudia asked where to begin cleaning. She noticed how a group of young associates smirked when she bent down to set her bucket near the glass doors. It didn't take long before the first arrow was shot. "Hey lady," a young man in a tight navy suit called out, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Don't leave stains on the boss's entrance. He likes things spotless." His smirk widened and his colleagues chuckled, some covering their mouths, others laughing openly. Claudia didn't respond. She knelt by the glass and began scrubbing slowly, her reflection faintly staring back at her in the clear surface. The mop in her hand shook slightly, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding back the rising humiliation. She reminded herself why she was here. She wasn't here to defend herself. She wasn't here to correct them. She was here to watch, to listen, to witness. More whispers followed as she moved deeper into the offices. "Look at her shoes, must be from some charity bin. She walks like she's about to collapse. Does she even know how to clean properly?" Each comment was quiet but sharp, like little blades meant to cut. As she crouched near the edge of the hallway, wiping away dust from the baseboards, a woman in high heels clicked past. The woman didn't even glance down as she muttered, "Don't clean so slowly, Grandma. We don't pay for naps here." A few desks away, someone let out a laugh and another chimed in with, "Careful or she'll fall asleep on the mop." Claudia's chest tightened. It wasn't the words alone that pained her, it was the silence of everyone else. Not one person spoke up. Not one voice objected. Even those who didn't laugh simply watched with indifference, choosing the comfort of silence over the courage of kindness. She gripped the brush tighter, feeling the rough would bite into her palm. She thought of all the years she had raised her son, teaching him to value people regardless of wealth or status. She thought of the sacrifices she had made so he could have an education, so he could climb higher than she ever dreamed. And now, in the empire that bore the fruit of her sacrifices, she was being treated as less than human. Still, Claudia pressed on. She had faced humiliation before in her life, times of poverty, times when others had looked down on her simply for being a single mother struggling to survive. But those struggles had also made her strong. What hurt her now was not personal insult, but the realization that this company, her son's company, might have strayed far from the values she had once fought for. By mid-morning, the cruelty had only deepened. While she polished a glass table near the conference rooms, two young employees leaned against the wall whispering loudly enough for her to hear. "Who even hired this relic? Did she come with the building?" One joked. The other snorted, "Maybe she's just here for the free heating." Their laughter rang out until a manager passed by, adding with mock seriousness, "Be careful, she might scratch the floor with those old bones." The words sliced through the air like knives. Claudia lowered her head, continuing her work. But inside she was cataloging every face, every voice, every sneer. Her silence was not weakness, it was observation. She was gathering proof of the decay she feared had taken root. Later, as she passed near a cluster of desks, a gum-chewing employee propped his feet on the table and shouted, "Hey, Grandma! Aren't you embarrassed crawling around here for a few coins? Don't you have family to take care of you?" This time Claudia looked up. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her eyes and met his. The man shifted uncomfortably, perhaps startled by the quiet strength behind her gaze. But she said nothing. She simply turned back to her work, the knot in her throat tightening. In that silence, she was already writing the verdict in her mind. Because Claudia knew the truth, this was no longer about her. This was about a company that had forgotten the humanity beneath the suits. A company where silence was complicit, where laughter came at the cost of dignity, and where cruelty was dressed up as humor. And she needed her son to see it. With his own eyes. By the time the afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the office, Claudia's body was weary, but her mind remained sharp. Every insult, every laugh, every look of disdain had carved itself deep into her memory. She could feel her heart ache not because of what she endured, but because of what it revealed, the culture of arrogance that thrived inside these walls. She carried her bucket into the executive hallway, the part of the building reserved for managers and top-level staff. Here the air felt heavier, filled with a different kind of confidence, the smugness of people who believed their status placed them above others. Claudia paused for a moment, studying the polished doors and gleaming nameplates. She had once dreamed of this company representing something noble. Now it was just another monument to pride. She knelt to scrub a glass door when a group of managers walked by, their voices loud with gossip and laughter. One of them stopped, staring at her as though she were a stain on the floor. "Who hired this relic?" he sneered. "Did she come with the building?" The others roared with laughter, tossing remarks like darts. "Careful, she might collapse before she finishes the hallway. We should get her a walker instead of a mop." Claudia's hand froze on the brush. Their words weren't new to her, life had thrown cruel remarks her way before, but here in the place her son led, they pierced deeper. She steadied herself, reminding her heart of the mission. She wasn't here to defend herself, she was here to measure the soul of this company. And from what she saw, the soul was rotting. The humiliation escalated soon after. As she tidied near the conference hall, one supervisor deliberately walked close, pretending to trip. A full glass of water spilled across her back. Cold liquid soaked through her coat, clinging to her skin. The supervisor laughed loudly, clapping his hands as though he had performed a trick. "Oops. These things happen when people get in the way." Instead of concern, the room erupted in laughter. Some clapped. Others doubled over their desks. Claudia stood silently, her hands trembling, not from cold, but from the force of containing her dignity. She wanted to speak, to remind them that respect should never be conditional. But she bit back the words, knowing her silence would reveal far more later than any defense now. She bent down, lifting the bucket with quiet grace. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of those who mocked her. Every face, every cruel smirk, she recorded carefully in her mind. Each moment added weight to the truth she would eventually deliver. As the hours dragged on, the remarks became more cutting. A woman leaning on her desk muttered to her colleague, loud enough for Claudia to hear, "Look how she drags herself. She probably comes from some forgotten neighborhood, the kind you drive past with your windows up. I bet she doesn't even know how to read." That sentence struck Claudia like a blade. She pressed against the mop handle for balance, steadying herself against the dizziness of anger. Not because she was ashamed of where she came from, poverty had been her teacher, not her shame, but because of the heartless ease with which they dismissed her as unworthy of dignity. And yet she still kept silent. For silence had power too. Later, when the office began to empty, Claudia prepared to leave. But just as she reached for her coat, the same supervisor who had poured water on her intercepted her path. He smirked, blocking the way. "Before you leave, clean the meeting room properly. Tomorrow's an important day and we don't want it looking like a pigsty. Do it right this time, old lady." The words sank into her chest, heavy as stones. Claudia's eyes filled with tears she refused to release. She simply nodded, though her throat tightened with unspoken pain. She knew she had seen enough. But not everyone knew what was coming. As she entered the meeting room with her bucket, she overheard two executives chuckling near the corner. "Imagine if that cleaner was the boss's mother," one joked. "We'd all be dead from shame." Their laughter echoed like the cruelest irony. Claudia's grip on the mop stiffened, and for a moment she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. They didn't know that their words weren't a joke at all, they were a prophecy seconds from fulfillment. Because across the building, her son Thomas was arriving. He wore a dark coat, a folder tucked under his arm, his expression unreadable as he strode through the hallway. Employees stepped aside, greeting him with nervous smiles. Yet none noticed the older woman who had just endured their cruelty all day. To them she was still invisible. Claudia saw him at the far end of the corridor. For a heartbeat, mother and son locked eyes. She lowered her gaze immediately, unwilling to break the disguise just yet. Her whisper barely carried through the hallway. I saw what I had to see. Thomas's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening on the folder. He wanted to speak, to comfort her, but before he could, the same employees who had mocked her earlier burst into the corridor, still laughing about the morning's jokes. Their laughter stopped abruptly when they saw Thomas standing there. "Ah, boss, we didn't see you arrive," the supervisor stammered, his smirk now a mask of nervousness. "What a pleasure." Thomas said nothing. He walked past them, straight into the conference room. The employees exchanged confused glances, uncertain why their boss's silence felt so heavy. Meanwhile, Claudia retreated quietly into the locker room reserved for cleaning staff. There, away from mocking eyes, she peeled off her yellow gloves slowly, her hands trembling. Alone at last, she let out the sob she had swallowed all day. Tears streaked her face as she sank onto the bench. She had endured ridicule before, but never had it carried such weight because this time, it reflected the very company her son commanded. Back in the boardroom, the executives were gathering, preparing for their meeting. Thomas entered without a greeting. He set his folder on the table with a deliberate thud, the sound silencing the chatter. Slowly he reached into his coat and produced a small USB drive. "Before we begin," he said, his voice firm, "there is something you all need to see." The projector flickered on, casting light across the room. One by one, the security camera clips began to play, every insult, every act of cruelty, every smirk aimed at the woman they believed to be nothing more than a cleaner. The laughter from earlier now played back in chilling clarity, echoing through the boardroom like ghosts of shame. Faces turned pale. Some executives shifted uncomfortably. Others swallowed hard. The room grew heavier with each passing second. Finally Thomas spoke again. "That woman is my mother." The words dropped like thunder. No one moved. No one breathed. For the first time that day, silence had meaning. The boardroom was silent except for the hum of the projector. The footage played out with brutal clarity. Claudia on her knees scrubbing glass, the young associate sneering, the woman in heels calling her grandma, the deliberate spill of water across her back, and the laughter that followed like a chorus of cruelty. Every moment was recorded, every face illuminated in the cold glow of the screen. Some executives shifted in their chairs, their eyes darting toward the exit as though escape might be possible. Others swallowed hard, unable to meet Thomas's gaze. The arrogance that had filled the office hours before was gone, replaced with shame and fear. Finally Thomas spoke. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of both fury and disappointment. "That woman you mocked, degraded, and laughed at as if she were nothing, she is my mother." The sentence fell like thunder across the room. A manager at the far end dropped his pen. Someone gasped softly. The supervisor who had spilled the water went pale, his lips parting but no words coming. "You didn't just humiliate her," Thomas continued. "You exposed the true face of this company, the face we've allowed to take shape behind polished glass and expensive suits. And I will not tolerate it." An executive rose nervously. "Boss, it was a misunderstanding. A bad joke perhaps. It doesn't represent everyone." "A misunderstanding?" Thomas's eyes hardened. "So laughter at cruelty is a misunderstanding? Silence when injustice is happening is a misunderstanding? If that's the standard we set, then what do we stand for at all?" The words pierced deeper than any accusation. Silence followed, thick and heavy, as though the walls themselves recoiled from the shame. Meanwhile, in the cleaner's locker room, Claudia sat on the wooden bench, folding her gloves neatly in her lap. Her tears had dried, but her eyes remained red. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about values. This company bore her family's name, built on the sacrifices of her youth, sacrifices no one in those polished suits could ever understand. And today she had seen it crumble into a nest of arrogance. The door creaked open. A young woman in a simple blouse stepped in timidly. She was one of the junior employees, someone who hadn't laughed but hadn't spoken up either. "Ma'am," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I just wanted to say what happened today was ugly. Not all of us are like that." Claudia studied her face. The girl's eyes held sincerity but also shame. Claudia's voice was gentle yet firm. "I wish that were true, daughter. But when no one speaks against cruelty, silence becomes its ally. And silence hurts too. The young woman lowered her head, her cheeks flushing with guilt. She had no reply. Claudia rose, her back straighter than before. She had worn the role of cleaner all day, endured every humiliation without a word, but now her silence was over. She left the room with steady steps, walking toward the hallway where her son stood waiting. Thomas met her near the main lobby. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the CEO in his tailored coat, the older woman in her plain dress. To everyone else they looked worlds apart. But in truth they were bound by something deeper than any position or title. "I saw it all," Claudia whispered, her voice low but steady. "And now you have seen it too." Thomas clenched his jaw, nodding once. "I will set it right." Together they walked toward the boardroom, where the top brass still sat in uneasy silence. As Claudia lingered near the door, Thomas stepped inside, his presence commanding the room. "From this day forward," he declared, "anyone who participated in or condoned what happened this morning will no longer be part of this company. Effective immediately." Murmurs exploded across the table. Some executives protested, their voices high with panic. Others begged for another chance, claiming they hadn't meant harm. Tears welled in a few eyes, but Thomas did not waver. "This isn't punishment," he said firmly. "It is consequence. A company that thrives on humiliation has no future. And I will not allow my mother's name or mine to be attached to such rot." The decision was final. Dismissal letters were prepared before sunset. That evening the atmosphere in the office was unlike anything before. Some employees packed their things in silence, their heads low with regret. Others wept openly, realizing too late the weight of their cruelty. The supervisor who had spilled water on Claudia sat in his car outside, clutching the dismissal letter with trembling hands. His arrogance was gone, in its place was only despair. A reporter passing by noticed the unusual scene, former employees leaving with boxes, tear-streaked faces, tension hanging in the air. He approached the dismissed supervisor and asked what had happened. The man's voice cracked as he replied, "We mocked the wrong person. We thought it didn't matter, but it mattered more than we imagined." His words dissolved into sobs. Upstairs, Claudia stood by the tall windows of the CEO's office. She looked out at the glowing city, her reflection merging with the skyline. She had been mocked, degraded, treated as invisible. Yet through her silence and endurance, she had revealed a truth that could no longer be ignored. Thomas entered quietly, standing beside her. For the first time in years he seemed less like a CEO and more like a son. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Mom," he said softly, emotion heavy in his voice. "Thank you for not staying silent." Claudia turned to him, her eyes weary but full of strength. She touched his cheek gently. "Respect is not demanded with power, Thomas. It is earned with example. Remember this, you never know who is behind the mask. Appearances deceive, but dignity must never be negotiable." Her words settled into his heart like iron. For the first time in a long while, Thomas felt not just the weight of leadership, but the responsibility of legacy. The next morning the company felt different. Employees greeted one another with caution, aware that the culture they once tolerated was no longer acceptable. The air was quieter, heavier with reflection. And when Claudia entered, not in cleaning clothes, but in a simple cream ensemble beside her son, every person rose instinctively. This time their respect wasn't out of fear. It was recognition. Thomas stopped at the reception desk, turning to his mother. "Stay with me for a while," he said. "Help me rebuild this. Help me teach them what I forgot." Claudia gave a faint smile. "Of course. But we'll start with something simple. We'll teach them how to look one another in the eyes." Together they walked through the halls. Former employees carried boxes out the doors, their careers reduced to remnants. Inside, the staff left behind straightened their backs, uncertain of what the future would hold. Yet one truth rang clear in every heart. Respect was no longer optional, it was the foundation. The changes began almost immediately. By the following week the office felt like a different place. The loud arrogance that once filled the halls had been replaced with a quiet caution. Employees who had once laughed easily at another's pain now thought twice before speaking. They glanced at Claudia with a mixture of respect and guilt, remembering how easily they had dismissed her when she was disguised as a cleaner. For Claudia it wasn't about revenge. She hadn't endured the day of humiliation just to see people fired or shamed. What mattered to her was that the truth had been revealed, that the mask of professionalism had been pulled away, exposing the rot underneath. Only by facing the ugliness could the company hope to rebuild. Thomas kept his word. He called every department into the auditorium, Not with speeches prepared by PR managers or notes drafted by assistants, but with nothing more than his heart. Standing before them, he admitted the truth. "My mother came here because she wanted me to see what I had become blind to," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "I thought we had built a company of excellence. Instead, we built walls of arrogance. And for that I am ashamed." No one dared interrupt. The silence was heavy but not empty, it was the silence of listening. "That ends now," Thomas continued. "This company will no longer be a place where dignity depends on status. We will rebuild from the ground up. Not for profit. Not for pride. For people." In the front row, Claudia sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't need to speak, her presence was enough. Her son's words were proof that he had listened, that he had learned. In the days that followed, training sessions were introduced, not on productivity or sales targets, but on respect, empathy, and workplace dignity. For the first time, employees were reminded that their value was measured not by how high they climbed, but by how they treated those beside them. Claudia remained at the office for several days, walking the halls with a quiet grace that commanded more respect than any title. Some employees approached her hesitantly, offering apologies. She accepted them with a nod, but never with bitterness. "Learn from it," she would say. "Do better. That is apology enough." Outside the building, the story spread quickly. The media caught wind of what had happened: the CEO's mother disguised as a cleaner, the cruelty revealed, the firings that followed. Headlines called it, "The Day the Company Was Tested," and "The CEO's Mother Who Changed Everything." But Claudia didn't care for headlines. What mattered was that the lesson would last, not only within the company but beyond its walls. People would remember that respect is not a privilege to be granted, but a duty owed to every human being. One evening, as the city lights glittered below, Claudia stood once more by the window of the top floor. Thomas joined her, his expression calmer than it had been in years. "You've given me more than leadership advice," he said softly. "You've given me my compass back." Claudia smiled faintly, placing a hand over his. "Then don't lose it again. Empires can fall. Money can vanish. But dignity, once it's lost, is harder to rebuild than any fortune." For a long moment, mother and son stood together, watching the city that stretched endlessly before them. The world outside bustled on, unaware of the quiet revolution that had begun inside that building. Claudia knew her role was done. She had endured mockery, swallowed humiliation, and stood silent when every bone in her body wanted to scream. But in the end, her silence had spoken louder than words. It had exposed truth, demanded justice, and reminded everyone that appearances deceive, but respect must never be negotiable. And with that, the company's new story began, not one written in reports or profit margins, but in the way its people looked one another in the eyes.